guttural bark of a canine unit, a German shepherd named Shadow. His bark so sudden and primal, it cut through the buzz of the terminal like a warning shot, causing nearby passengers to flinch and turn with startled expressions, phones reflexively raised by some, others instinctively stepping back, uncertain but alert. And there he was, Shadow, fur bristling, tail stiff as iron, eyes laser-focused on a particular trio that had just entered from security clearance, a woman in a long beige trench coat, sunglasses too dark for indoor lighting, perched over an impassive face with tight lips and drawn brows, her right hand gripping the delicate, tiny fingers of a little girl, no more than 3 years old, in a sunflower yellow dress and cartoon character sneakers, while beside her walked a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark gray hoodie with the hood half up, a subtle 5 o'clock shadow across his jaw, his left hand curled around the shoulder of a small boy, maybe 5, who shuffled along without looking up, his thin frame hidden under a puffy blue jacket zipped to his chin even though the air was warm, his eyes shadowed by the bill of a baseball cap too big for his head. This group, at first glance, looked like any traveling family, tired and rushing, but to Shadow they screamed wrong. And when Logan Brooks, Shadow's handler, in his 30s, leaned with a purposeful walk and a trimmed beard, a badge clipped to the breast pocket of his fitted black uniform, felt the tension in the leash snap taut, he turned in time to see Shadow lunge forward, barking like he'd just been trained yesterday, his teeth bared not in threat but in alert, his entire body a vibrating signal of danger. Logan's instincts kicked in, and he yanked the leash back with a sharp Shadow heel. That did nothing to calm the dog, who growled deep and low like a warning engine revving under the surface, his paws planted as if anchored to the floor, his eyes tracking the woman and the children with predatory precision. The couple paused mid-stride, the man offering a half smile and muttering, "We're just late for our flight," his voice flat, accent vague, unplaceable, as if practiced to be forgettable. But Logan wasn't listening to him, he was watching the girl, her wide eyes darting from Shadow to Logan and back, her mouth barely parting like she wanted to speak but was afraid to, while the boy didn't even look up, his body rigid, his small hand trembling as it clutched the man's sleeve, and Logan felt it, deep in his gut, the twist that years of canine work had trained him not to ignore, a feeling that Shadow's bark wasn't just a random burst of behavior, but a calculated, instinct-driven scream that something here, right in front of them, was horribly wrong. And as Shadow strained forward again, eyes now flicking from the woman's oversized leather tote bag to the boy's jacket, Logan raised his hand and stepped forward, heart pounding, voice steady but firm. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop for a moment." And the woman's face tightened, her lips pressing together in a faint smile that didn't touch her eyes. "It's okay, officer, we're just in a rush," she said, her tone overly sweet, but the edge in her posture, the tension in her grip on the girl's hand, told another story. And Shadow growled again, deeper now, nose twitching as if tracking a scent only he could identify, and Logan's mind raced through protocols, bomb detection, narcotics. No, this wasn't that. This was different. This was personal. The way the boy's hand twitched involuntarily, the size of the tote too large for a casual carry-on, the way the couple flinched, not when confronted, but when Shadow barked, that was the trigger. And still, the children hadn't spoken a word, hadn't made a sound, and Logan, crouching slightly to put himself at eye level with the kids, tried again. "Hey there, buddy, you okay?" And the boy's bottom lip quivered, but no words came, just silence, brittle and loud, before the woman quickly stepped forward, placing herself between Logan and the kids with the precision of someone practiced in control. "They're just tired," she said, her voice clipped now, smile gone. Shadow took a half step forward and let out a low rumble, the kind Logan had heard only once before, during a cartel bust when Shadow had sensed someone hiding with a weapon behind a wall, and it hit Logan then like a lightning bolt. Shadow doesn't make mistakes, not like this. not with this intensity. This wasn't just a behavioral reaction, it was a warning. A flashing red light wrapped in fur and fangs, and Logan realized the worst-case scenario was inching toward reality. Because something about these children didn't add up: the tremble in their hands, the way they recoiled when the adults pulled them closer, the fact that the boy hadn't unclenched his jaw once, like he'd been coached to stay silent, and Logan, standing tall again, felt sweat prick at the back of his neck, radio crackling at his side but ignored, because in this moment, surrounded by passengers pretending not to stare, but very much watching, Logan had to make a decision that couldn't be undone. Trust the training, or write this off as an overreaction from a dog who never overreacts. And so he raised his hand, open-palmed, a peace offering turned barrier, and said calmly, "I'm going to need to see some ID." And as the man's jaw tightened, Logan's hand instinctively dropped near his holster, not drawing but ready, the tension between them pulling taut like a wire under strain. The woman's sunglasses reflected the terminal lights, so Logan couldn't see her eyes, but her body gave it away: too stiff, too rehearsed, too ready to bolt. And Shadow, bless him, stayed low, growling with laser focus, his body vibrating with restraint and purpose. And Logan knew, in the pit of his stomach, that this was about to be something much darker than anyone around them realized. And the scariest part? It had only just begun. The man's hand moved slowly toward his back pocket, a gesture meant to look casual but reading all wrong to Logan's seasoned eye. And as he pulled out a black leather wallet with slightly trembling fingers, Logan's heartbeat ticked upward. Not from fear, but from that sharp edge of anticipation honed by every moment in uniform. Every busted case, every instinct honed beside his dog Shadow, who now moved in a slow arc, circling the group with deliberate steps. Head low, ears angled forward, the leash pulled taut but quiet, like a tripwire waiting to snap. Logan watched Evelyn, though she hadn't given her name yet, as she clutched the tote bag tighter to her body, the thin strap digging into the fabric of her trench coat, her gloved fingers so tight that her knuckles looked bone white. And there was something else, something almost imperceptible in her stance, like she was bracing for a blow that hadn't come yet, while the little girl next to her, Lily, looked up at Logan with wide eyes that shimmered with unshed tears, her lower lip trembling, her tiny hands gripping the hem of her yellow dress like an anchor ray. The man finally produced an ID card and handed it to Logan, his gaze never steady, always twitching toward the terminal gate signs. And as Logan studied the photo, noting how the plastic still gleamed like it had just been printed, the name said Raymond Doyle, but the picture, although technically correct, lacked any of the subtle wrinkles, stress lines, or sun fade one would expect from a frequent traveler, the kind of micro details Logan had trained himself to notice. Then Evelyn handed over hers, a California license with an address in Sacramento and a name. He immediately forgot, because what held his attention was the way her hand jerked just slightly as she offered it, as though she didn't want to let it go. And Logan accepted it, scanned both IDs, nodded slowly. But his mind wasn't slowing down, it was speeding up, processing everything. The boy, still mute, his eyes locked to the floor, his baseball cap slightly tilted like it had been tugged down too quickly, the way the jacket sleeves were too long for his arms, swallowing his hands in a way that could have been innocent or deliberate. And Shadow let out another low whine, his nose hovering near the boy's jacket again before shifting sharply toward Evelyn's tote, the suddenness of it pulling Logan's eyes to the bag, which looked heavier than it should be for a carry-on. The bottom sagging slightly, shape undefined, and in a flash Logan's memory ticked through everything TSA was trained to spot: sedatives, restraints, unregistered devices, and more importantly, the signs no machine could catch: fear, silence, coached behavior. He knelt suddenly, not aggressively, just low enough to meet the boy's eye level, his voice soft as he spoke. "Hey buddy, what's your name?" But the boy didn't answer, just swallowed hard, throat bobbing under the collar of his jacket, and Evelyn moved quickly, placing herself between Logan and the boy again, like a shield, like a handler stepping in front of contraband. "There. Just nervous, officer," she said. Her voice now dipped in a honey sweetness too overdone to be real. "Long day of travel, you know how kids get." And Logan didn't move, didn't respond, because Shadow suddenly went still, ears pinned. Back, tail horizontal, body coiled alert posture, and he let out a deep, singular bark that shattered the uneasy silence around them, drawing startled gasps from a nearby family and causing multiple passengers to pause mid-stride, now filming openly with their phones, whispering, wondering what was happening. And Logan, without breaking his gaze from Evelyn, reached calmly for his radio, clicking it once to signal backup without speaking into it, then slowly rose to his feet again and addressed them both, his tone casual on the surface but steel underneath. "Where are you headed?" Ray answered too quickly, "Cattle," then corrected himself, "Seattle." And Logan raised an eyebrow, pretending not to notice the slip, then added, "Vacation?" Evelyn nodded stiffly. "Just visited some family down in Houston," she said, but Logan knew Houston to Seattle with 2 kids didn't track. Not at this hour, not with that tote, not with the way these kids were reacting. And Shadow barked again. Louder, tail rigid, the same signal bark he was trained to use for high alert threats, explosives, concealed narcotics, and once, even a hidden weapon. Logan saw it now with full clarity. This wasn't a reaction to drugs or even bombs. This was about the children, the way Lily flinched now every time Evelyn twitched, the way the boy Ethan, he heard Evelyn mutter under her breath, hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, except to recoil from the dog. And then Logan caught it. A flicker of red around the boy's wrist, barely visible through the cuff of his too long sleeve. And as the child shifted slightly, the fabric moved just enough to reveal a mark thin, angry, like the kind left behind by a plastic zip tie pulled too tight. And Logan's stomach dropped, not because of the horror of it, but because it confirmed what his gut had been screaming since the first bark. Shadow had sensed it first, but now Logan saw it too, and the air around them seemed to slow, to thicken with the gravity of the moment. And suddenly, time mattered. Every second mattered, because if they let these people go, if he blinked, these kids would vanish into a terminal full of strangers and be lost for good. And Logan stepped forward now, hand raised again, his voice firmer, eyes sharp as blades. "Sir, ma'am, I need you to step aside and speak with me over here." And the man hesitated, just for a beat, eyes darting to the gate number, now announcing final boarding for a flight to Portland, not Seattle. Another red flag. And that's when Lily, who had remained frozen this whole time, took a step backward toward Logan, her tiny fingers loosening from Evelyn's grip, just a fraction. And Logan saw the hope in her eyes, the desperate plea she hadn't dared speak. And that was it. The crack in the glass. Shadow's bark exploded again, urgent and relentless. And Logan knew with absolute certainty now, this wasn't a mistake, this was a rescue, and it wasn't over yet. Logan didn't blink as the seconds bled into a standoff that stretched taut between instinct and chaos, the crowd around them growing thicker by the second, phones recording, whispers rippling like static through the terminal. But his entire focus narrowed to the 4 figures in front of him, the air electric with tension as Shadow planted his front paws, growled low, his tail a rigid line of warning, ears pinned flat against his skull. Not aggression, not confusion, but an unmistakable signal of locked-in alert. And Logan had seen this only once before, during a bust outside Phoenix when Shadow had cornered a suspect seconds before an unregistered weapon was drawn. So now he trusted the posture, trusted the dog that hadn't failed him in 5 years of service, trusted the instincts that were screaming louder than the terminal PA system, trusted the tremble in the boy's wrist, the unspoken words in Lily's eyes, the way Evelyn and Ray kept looking at each other, quick sharp glances like 2 chess players watching a board collapse. And as Logan moved 1 step closer, not rushing, but deliberately closing the space, Ray shifted subtly, the kind of micro movement that read like panic under pressure. his shoulders angling toward the gate in a twitch he probably thought was invisible. But Logan saw it, and so did Shadow, whose growl rose like a warning siren. Eyes now fixed on the boy again, nose twitching, body leaning in, and Logan's voice cut the moment like a blade. "Let me see what's in the bag." And Evelyn's fingers curled tighter around the tote, like she was holding on to gravity itself. "It's just snacks and toys for the kids," she said, voice tight. Forced calm that cracked around the edges, and Logan nodded slowly. "Then you won't mind if I take a look?" And for a half second, no one moved. Time held its breath. The gate behind them blared a final call, and in that fraction of hesitation, Logan saw it, the calculation in her face, the risk analysis, the options flashing like cards behind mirrored sunglasses. And in that instant, Ray twitched forward subtle, slight, but it was all Shadow needed, and with a bark that sounded like a thunderclap tearing down metal, the German Shepherd lunged, teeth sinking into the hem of Ray's jeans just above the ankle, not deep enough to break skin, but enough to halt motion mid-stride, jerking him violently off balance, so that he stumbled backward into a row of bolted chairs with a metallic crash that echoed across the terminal, drawing gasps and audible reactions from the crowd. But Logan didn't flinch, didn't shift his gaze from Evelyn, who screamed in that same instant. Not a cry of fear, but frustration, rage, and desperation all rolled into one piercing note as she yanked Lily's wrist and turned like she meant to bolt. But Logan moved faster, one arm snapping out to block her escape path, the other already dropping to unclip Shadow's leash while issuing a calm but deadly order. "Drop the bag." Now and Evelyn froze, just for a blink, just long enough for her hand to loosen, the tote bag falling to the polished tile floor. With a dull thud, and as it hit, something inside shifted audibly, a metal-on-metal slide that Logan's brain filed away immediately as not toys, and he moved without pause, crouched and unzipped the bag with hands steady but fast, peeled it open, and then stopped cold as his fingers reached inside and made contact with something wrong. Something sharp, too purposeful, too organized, and he pulled out the contents like he'd just yanked the truth into daylight. A plastic bottle of sedatives half filled, the label peeled away, a loop of soft synthetic rope, still coiled, clean, unused. A cheap burner phone with no contact names but one outgoing call to an Atlanta area code, and worst of all, a folded piece of white paper, smoothed from use with two names written in block capital letters, Lily and Ethan, Logan's. Heart stuttered in his chest, mind piecing it together in milliseconds, because this wasn't just suspicion now. This wasn't gut feeling or canine intuition, this was fact. Physical evidence screaming louder than Shadow's bark ever could. And suddenly the pieces slammed into place. These weren't their children. Not biologically, not legally, not by blood or custody, these were targets. Children abducted or groomed or snatched under the radar. Quiet kids with no one watching, no alarms raised. Just enough time to be turned into cargo on a trafficking route. And the woman in front of him, Evelyn, wasn't a panicked mother. She was a handler, a cog and assistant designed to mask evil in the skin of normalcy. And Ray wasn't a father, he was an enforcer. The quiet Shadow beside her, calm until the moment he had to run. And Logan didn't even hear the radio crackling again, didn't register the crowd fully now surrounding them at a distance. Hushed and horrified, didn't care about the phones filming or the TSA officers pushing through the line, because the only thing that mattered now was the way Lily's tiny mouth opened again. Just barely, and she looked up at Logan with those wide, brimming eyes and mouthed the word again, not loud, not even audible, but perfectly clear. Help, and something inside Logan snapped like a tripwire. Not violently, but with cold finality, and he took a step forward just as Ray tried to crawl away from Shadow's grip, dragging his pinned leg like he thought he could still make it to the exit. But Logan didn't shout, didn't threaten, he just let the dog go. Shadow. And the shepherd launched forward with surgical precision, intercepting Ray mid-crawl, and slamming him to the floor with a growl that sent vibrations through the tile, his teeth snapping shut just inches from Ray's hand as he barked again. This time sharp focused, and undeniably victorious, because the game was over, and as Evelyn raised her hand to snatch Lily again, Logan intercepted her wrist midair and held her frozen in place. "Don't even think about it," he said. Eyes locked on hers, and her sunglasses finally slipped from her face, revealing eyes that weren't panicked but calculating, like a chess master one move from checkmate who'd finally been cornered, her pupils shrinking under the terminal lights, sweat sliding down her temples, fingers twitching with indecision, and Logan's other hand tightened on his radio. "Dispatch, I have 2 suspects in custody. Suspected child trafficking. Requesting immediate backup. Children are safe. Repeat, children are safe." And even as he said it, his eyes never left the kids, not even for a blink, because the way they looked at him now, raw, afraid, desperate to believe, was something he couldn't let go, wouldn't forget. And Shadow stood over Ray like a sentinel, panting lightly, eyes fixed, growling low, as Evelyn's hand finally went limp and Lily stumbled backward into Logan's arms, collapsing against him in a sob that shook her entire body, her small frame racked with tension. And Logan held her, steady and calm, even as TSA agents finally arrived, swarming around them. And he whispered, "You're safe now," not because it was a line, but because it was the truth, their truth. And Shadow wagged his tail once, a low, slow arc of satisfaction, like he'd just completed the mission no one else saw coming. Logan didn't feel the weight of the evidence bag in his hand, not really, not compared to the pressure pressing into his ribs like a slow crush, the kind of weight that lives in the chest when realization hardens into truth and truth snaps into horror. Because now it wasn't just suspicion or gut feeling or Shadow's perfect instincts screaming from the floor, it was fact. Laid out in nylon and plastic, proof so clear it twisted his stomach into knots. The sedatives, half used, the kind typically prescribed under lock and key, but here casually tossed into the tote like breath mints. The nylon rope, clean and unfrayed, untouched and ready, not the kind for camping or luggage, but the kind used to restrain something small, something fragile. And the burner phone, wiped clean but not good enough, its log betraying one outgoing call just hours earlier to an Atlanta number flagged in more than one trafficking watch list. And the final piece, the note, so simple and devastating. A half-folded sheet of printer paper with Lily and Ethan typed in all caps. Black ink stark and cruel on the white background like names on tags in a morgue, and Logan felt cold, even though the terminal was warm and buzzing, even though sweat slid down the back of his neck and collected at his collar, even though people around him had stopped filming, stopped whispering, now just watching in frozen silence as TSA agents surrounded the scene like a perimeter forming around a body, like everyone could smell that something dark had tried to pass through here under cover of parental smiles and travel documents. And Shadow didn't stop growling, didn't stop tracking, his body tense but controlled, an apex of discipline and instinct, his nose twitching as he scanned Evelyn's movements, while Logan slowly backed toward the wall, with Lily still clinging to him, her tiny fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt, like she could claw her way into his chest and hide inside him, her sobs short and silent like she was terrified to make noise. And Ethan, still near the edge of the chaos, finally looked up for the first time. And Logan's heart cracked, because what he saw in those eyes wasn't surprise, wasn't panic, it was relief, raw and painful, the kind that comes from a child who didn't expect to be seen, who thought maybe this was just how the world worked now. And Logan reached for him with his free arm, keeping his voice low but firm, steady like a signal tower in a storm. "You're safe, both of you, no one's going to take you." And Ethan hesitated, just a moment, but stepped closer, like a machine relearning how to move. And Logan rested a hand on his shoulder while shouting toward Tessa, "Get cuffs on them now." And even as Evelyn tried one last time to twist away, to grab for Lily again. Logan stepped between them, one arm still shielding the children, the other outstretched like a barrier of steel, and shouted, "Don't!" And that word hit harder than any scream, because it came from a place beyond anger, from the deep, protective instinct that flares up when someone tries to hurt the innocent in front of you. And Evelyn flinched, not from fear, but from recognition, like she knew now it was done, that there was no more lying, no escape, and she stiffened, froze, her body language going flat and mechanical as if pulling back into herself. Ray still pinned to the floor under Shadow's weight, groaning but not fighting, because even he had realized there was no running from this, not now, not with 24 people filming, not with his name already being sent through every agency database by the officer now radioing in from Logan's right, not with those kids staring up at Logan like he'd just cracked open the sky and pulled them through. And then it came. The moment Logan would replay 1,000 times, Lily pulling away slightly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, then reaching for Shadow, not in fear, not to recoil, but to press her small hands into his fur, burying her face into the coarse black and brown coat like it was the only safe thing in the world. And Shadow, still alert, still tracking every twitch Evelyn made, let her hold him, allowed her to hide in him, the growl softening, not gone, just dialed down for her, as if he understood this child needed to breathe. And Logan finally exhaled. 2. Letting the weight of everything settle over him. This wasn't just a near miss or a strange encounter at security. This had been minutes from turning into a disappearance. A silent vanishing act that would have made it onto the news as a delayed Amber Alert, a confused investigation into a couple who were already gone, leaving behind nothing but vague security footage and empty coffee cups in the terminal. And Logan couldn't stop thinking, what if Shadow hadn't barked? What if he'd tugged the leash back and assumed it was a mistake? What if Lily hadn't had the courage to mouth that word? What if, and then came the words, harsh and cruel and matter of fact, as Evelyn, cuffed now, being pulled to her feet, looked straight at Logan and said, "You have no idea what you've done." Not panicked, not desperate, just cold, like the mask had slipped, and now he was looking at the real person underneath. The handler, the trafficker, the operator, and Logan stared back, his voice even low, unwavering. "Yeah, I stopped you." And Evelyn didn't blink, didn't respond, just looked away, and Ray, still on the ground, muttered something unintelligible before officers dragged him upright. His hands cuffed, face pale, lips pressed tight, and as both were escorted out of the terminal, Logan stayed kneeling with the kids, one arm around each of them now, Shadow sitting in front of them like a shield forged from instinct. And Logan said nothing for a long moment, just watched the agents move, the crowd dissipate, and felt the smallest hands in the world tighten around his shirt and jacket, like the two souls pressed against him believed, for the first time in God knows how long, that they were going to be okay. And in the echo of the chaos, with airport noise returning, with people walking past pretending they hadn't watched a child trafficking bust happen right beside them, Logan whispered into Shadow's fur, "You knew before I did. You always know." And the dog thumped his tail once, slow and steady, like he agreed. The interrogation room was colder than the rest of the terminal, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The kind of cold that clings to fluorescent lit walls and windowless corners, where truths aren't spoken so much as extracted. And Evelyn sat across from Logan in that room now, her hands cuffed in front of her, fingers twitching with the phantom motion of control she no longer held, her trench coat wrinkled from the struggle, sunglasses confiscated, revealing a pair of eyes that darted toward the one-way mirror more often than they met Logan's, her mouth drawn into a thin line that tried to play it calm. But her knuckles told the real story white, from the way her fists twisted in her lap as if wringing water from a towel, while Shadow lay at Logan's side, ears pricked, eyes half-lidded but alert, that silent, unnerving kind of still that only dogs and apex predators can pull off. And Logan, sitting opposite her in the bolted-down metal chair, flipped slowly through the documents in the file before him, both IDs. Fake and too clean, no wear on the edges, the driver's license. For a Raymond Doyle, whose California address didn't exist according to the system. Evelyn's matching license with a Sacramento address that traced back to a vacant lot. Travel itineraries with QR codes that scanned but led nowhere. And then the clear plastic evidence bag with its damning contents, the rope, the sedatives, the burner phone, and the folded note with Lily and Ethan's names printed like luggage tags to hell. And Logan didn't speak at first, didn't rush the opening move, just let the silence breathe between them, stretching it long enough to let discomfort creep under her skin like a slow fever. And when he finally did speak, his voice was low, smooth, the same way he might speak to someone he was trying to keep calm before breaking their entire life apart. "You want to tell me what your plan was?" And Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't snarl or weep. She just exhaled slowly, like someone adjusting to altitude, and glanced at the mirror again, then at Shadow, then at Logan, finally meeting his eyes with a look that tried to say, "You won't break me," but there was a crack already forming at the corner of her mouth. And Logan tilted his head, folding his arms, body language relaxed but coiled like a spring under the table. "You're not here because of a misunderstanding," he said, calm as a breath. "You're here because that dog of mine saw something you hoped nobody would." And that flickered something in her face, not fear, but annoyance, like a plan gone sideways. And Shadow let out the barest hint of a growl, low and steady, enough to shift the balance in the room without anyone moving a muscle. And Logan continued, "Who are they?" he asked, meaning Lily and Ethan, the names that echoed louder than her own right now. And for the first time Evelyn spoke, voice thin, mechanical, like the truth cost interest every second it stayed inside her. "They're not mine," she said, the words floating in the dead air like a dropped scalpel. And Logan didn't react, just waited, because she wasn't done. Not yet. And sure enough, she added, "They're part of a job." And the way she said job made his skin crawl, like this wasn't about people, but cargo, product, things to be moved, not saved. And Logan leaned in slightly, arms still folded, nodding slowly like he was confirming a theory he'd already solved. "You're part of a ring," he said, not a question, just putting it into the air to watch her squirm under it. And she didn't deny it, didn't blink, just looked away, jaw clenched now, the veneer starting to chip at the edges. And Logan flipped the evidence bag upright on the table and let it sit there between them like a loaded weapon, the rope coiled neatly, the sedative bottle sloshing faintly, and the phone, screen black but pulsing with meaning. And Evelyn's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the truth dragging her spine downward. And Logan pushed just a little harder. "You were taking them to Atlanta," he said, and this time her eyes shot up fast, a flicker of alarm. Not big but loud enough for Logan to catch it, and he leaned forward, voice dipping even lower. "That's where they'd vanish, right? Where someone would be waiting to distribute them." And Evelyn swallowed, lips parting like she might argue, might play the misunderstanding card one last time. But then Shadow shifted slightly at Logan's feet, just enough to let out another low breath of a growl, and the sound pushed her over the edge. "We don't ask where they go," she muttered, and Logan sat back, hands falling to his lap, breathing slow, the weight of her words hitting like cement. This wasn't a rogue couple or some random kidnapping, this was systemic. This was a supply chain for stolen children, and Evelyn was just the courier, the face used to disarm suspicion. The maternal camouflage slipped over evil like a trench coat over a knife. And Logan stared at her, his voice flat now. "You moved them like furniture," he said, and she didn't answer, didn't blink, just dropped her eyes again, like maybe looking at the floor would make it all go away. And Logan stood slowly, gathering the file, pushing the chair back with the scrape of metal on tile. And Shadow rose too, tail still, body alert. And Evelyn winced, not visibly, not dramatically, but her jaw twitched just once, like the shame was trying to crawl out from somewhere deep inside, and Logan didn't look at her again. Not as he opened the door and stepped into the hall, where an FBI agent waited with a notepad and a grim face. "We've got names," Logan said. "Atlanta's the drop point," and the agent nodded, stepping away to call it in. And as Logan walked down the corridor toward the waiting area, his steps heavy but certain, he passed another door where Ray sat slumped in a chair, his eyes puffy, his face bruised slightly from Shadow's takedown. And he didn't speak either, just stared at the wall like someone watching the end of a long lie unraveling down the hall. In a bright room guarded by 2 officers, Lily and Ethan sat on a couch too big for their frames, holding donated stuffed animals, blinking slowly at the social worker trying to talk to them. And Logan paused just outside the glass, watching them, seeing how Lily leaned into Ethan now, her voice still silent, but her body language finally releasing some of that coiled fear. And Logan whispered under his breath, not to anyone in particular, just to the air between his ribs, "You're safe now." And Shadow sat beside him, eyes locked on the kids through the glass, tail tapping once against the floor like a quiet heartbeat. And Logan reached down, resting a hand gently behind the dog's ears, and said it again, this time to both of them, dog and kids, case and life, instinct and action, "You're safe." The sun had already dipped low by the time Logan stepped out of the terminal, its last orange fingers streaking the sky behind rows of blinking runway lights. But the warmth did nothing to melt the chill that had settled in his chest, that deep set frost that comes when you realize you're not closing a case, but opening a door. And on the other side is a machine built to hide in plain sight. And even as Shadow padded quietly at his side, every step methodical and alert, Logan couldn't shake the weight of what Evelyn had confessed in that dim room, where the air smelled like metal and disinfectant and secrets. "Because we don't ask where they go" wasn't just a confession, it was a revelation, a window into something massive and faceless and terrifying. And as Logan opened the precinct door 20 minutes later, already dialing into his secure line, his mind wasn't on paperwork or procedure, it was on the faces of the kids he hadn't found yet. The ones who didn't have a shadow between them and the dark. And the next morning started before the sun even rose, coffee bitter and cold on his desk, his inbox flooded with files from the FBI's trafficking division, and Shadow curled at his feet, wasn't sleeping. Logan knew that the dog's ears twitched at every hallway footstep, every buzz of the overhead fluorescence, every creak in the vents, like he was waiting for the world to break open again. And as Logan scrolled through the evidence, every new page made his stomach tighten. Evelyn and Ray's IDs were confirmed fakes, clean and consistent with a known trafficker out of Denver who'd been flagged 3 times but never caught. And the burner phone they'd been carrying had not just one Atlanta number on it, but 3 each linked to similar cases across Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee. And the moment that confirmed it was when Logan opened a surveillance report from a Tennessee airport just 10 days old, and in the grainy footage, a different woman in a floral maxi dress and oversized sun hat clutched the hand of a little girl with blank eyes and a stiff walk. And Logan paused the video at the exact second. The girl glanced up at the camera expressionless, mouth closed tight, and it was the same look Lily had worn before she mouthed, "Help." And Logan knew this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. This was organized, deliberate, practiced, and profitable. And the more he dug, the worse it got. Documents cross-referencing airport security failures, border skips, temporary custody loopholes, foster system black holes. And every time Logan thought he'd seen the worst of it, another case file popped up: Chicago, Phoenix, Tampa, Charlotte, all with the same pattern. Kids aged 3 to 9. Mismatched documentation, quiet personalities, often no missing persons report for days because they were taken from broken systems or manipulated guardians. And the thing that made his blood run cold was how smooth it all was, how invisible, until Shadow barked at the right moment. And now the system was bleeding light, And then came the internal ping, his supervisor, Sergeant Taylor, knocking once on the door before stepping inside, handing Logan a printout from the FBI with a quiet urgency in his voice. "They're forming a task force," he said. "They want you and Shadow on it. You're going to the briefing." And Logan didn't hesitate, didn't ask for time, didn't even stand up with ceremony. He just whistled once and Shadow rose instantly, back straight, eyes sharp, and they walked into the conference room together like two halves of the same weapon, and the room itself buzzed with tension. Agents in suits, detectives with tablets, Homeland Security analysts already sketching supply routes on a digital board filled with red pins across the eastern seaboard. And at the head of it all was a woman named Ramirez, FBI, early 40s, sharp black suit, voice like polished steel. And when she spoke, every conversation died. "What we're dealing with is not a couple of low-rent traffickers," she said, gesturing toward the screen where images flipped between photos of suspects and missing children posters. "This is a web multi-state, multi-tiered, using airports, bus terminals, and sometimes even public festivals to move children like freight." And she tapped the screen once and up came Atlanta, the epicenter, the blood heart of the map. And Logan leaned forward in his chair as she continued. "These people are professionals, coordinated, resourced, and trained to blend in. They're using forged documents good enough to pass basic scans, tech-savvy enough to jam surveillance logs, and insulated by a chain of proxies who disappear at the first sign of heat." And Logan saw it all now. The reason Evelyn and Ray were so clean, so calm, it wasn't their first run, and it wouldn't have been their last. And Ramirez turned to the room, eyes scanning the faces like a field general looking for her forward operators. "We've got 2 suspects already in custody in Georgia's same fake parents. 2 children missing out of Tennessee. This isn't a coincidence," she said. "This is a network," and she pointed at Logan. "And you and that dog of yours are the only reason we've got a crack in it." And Logan didn't feel pride, didn't feel spotlighted. He felt angry, focused, like someone had handed him a trail of footprints and a torch and said, "Go." And as the briefing concluded and agents fanned out to prep next steps, Logan lingered behind, staring at the photo of a man listed as Jacob Kane, recruiter, suspected middle ring operator, last known address in Savannah, clean criminal record, but tied to 5 missing children by travel overlaps. And Logan stared at the man's face, bland, middle-aged, smooth smile and tidy haircut. The kind of guy who could sit beside you at a conference and disappear the next day with your daughter in shadow, watching from under the table, let out a soft, steady huff of breath. And Logan knew, in his bones, in the deepest part of the gut that never lies, that Kane wasn't just another brick in the wall. He was a pressure point, a central artery in a system that could bleed out if cut right. And as Logan printed the file and turned to leave, Shadow at his heels, Ramirez stopped him briefly. At the door, her voice quiet but clear. "Your instincts saved those kids, but your dog?" "He saved the case." And Logan didn't smile, just nodded once, motioning to Shadow. "He's got a better read on people than I do." And as they left the building and stepped back into the rising heat of the day, Logan glanced toward the horizon, not for weather, but for movement, because now that he knew the size of the monster, he wasn't going to wait for it to come to him. He was going to find it, flank it, and drag it screaming into the light. 2 days later, the air in Atlanta felt thick enough to slice open, not from the heat, though it pressed down like wet cotton, but from the tension that had gripped the outskirts of an abandoned industrial zone just west of the city, where a rust-stained warehouse loomed behind a chain-link fence half-eaten by kudzu vines, its busted windows and crooked roof suggesting disuse to the untrained eye. But behind those walls, Logan knew something very real and very alive was operating, because this wasn't just another dead building. This was a nerve center, a place flagged by weeks of data scraping, surveillance threading, and quiet patterns of movement too subtle to be coincidence. And now Logan stood behind a stack of steel crates just inside the perimeter, gloved hands tightening around his vest straps, Tactical comes in his ear, feeding quiet orders from the FBI's lead agent, Ramirez, as the rest of the team fanned out like shadows across the dusty interior perimeter. Rifles at the low ready, boots moving in synchronized silence. And beside him, crouched and motionless, Shadow was stone still, his body flat to the concrete. Ears forward, nose twitching like a tuning fork. He was locked in, fully engaged. Every muscle coiled like a spring waiting for the word, and Logan, breathing slow through his nose, eyes locked on the far end of the warehouse where office lights flickered faintly behind a half-open rolling door, could already make out the figure of the man he had memorized from the briefing photo. Jacob Kane, dressed clean, almost insultingly normal, in a pale blue polo tucked into khakis, clipboard in one hand, cell phone in the other, standing like a warehouse supervisor conducting a late shipment check. But even from this distance, Logan could see it. The precision in his movement, the subtle glance over his shoulder at regular intervals, the lack of any real nervous energy, because Kane didn't feel vulnerable. He felt covered, and that's what made him dangerous. He thought he had the upper hand, thought the warehouse's decaying exterior would hide what was really inside. The maze of locked rooms, false walls, and camouflaged holding areas that had been used to pass at least a dozen trafficked children through the city in the last 8 months. And as Ramirez's voice crackled in the coms, Team A, hold at breach point. Team B, prepare to enter. From West Access, Logan tapped once on Shadow's harness, signaling focus, and the dog didn't move, but his ears pivoted instantly. And then the command came, go, and everything exploded into motion. Boots slamming the ground, rifles snapping up, bodies slicing through the dusty light like lightning bolts. And Logan swept around the crates as the breach team kicked the western fire door clean off its hinges, the impact ringing like a cannon. In the echo chamber of the warehouse, men shouting commands, hands in the air. Federal agents. And Jacob Kane didn't run, didn't even flinch, just slowly turned, lifted his hands in mock compliance, the clipboard clattering to the ground beside him, and Logan moved fast, Shadow right beside him. Steps in perfect unison, the two of them navigating the chaos like hunters crossing open snow, and Kane's eyes found them almost instantly, his calm expression cracking just a hair when he saw the dog. This him? He said with a low, smug half-smile as 2 agents closed in from either side. The mutt who messed up my flight plans? And Logan didn't answer, just stopped 5 feet from him, Shadow halting in perfect sync. Growl low and constant now, vibrating in his throat like a drum roll. And Logan's voice came out quiet, but razor sharp. No, he's the one who saved 2 kids you tried to make disappear. And for the first time, Kane's smile faded not from fear, but calculation. As if mentally flipping through backup plans, checking which exits were still viable. But before he could move, before he could even speak again, Ramirez herself was there, zip-tying his wrists and reading him Miranda in a voice devoid of emotion. And behind them, agents swept the far rooms, calling out numbers. Room clear. Storage is empty. We've got a hidden panel, check it. And then, from one of the far interior sections behind a false Havik panel, came a voice none of them expected. I got movement, 2 juveniles, both alive. And Logan's breath caught for half a second as he turned and moved fast. Shadow right with him, through rows of broken-down shelving and half-rotted pallets, into a narrow corridor lined with boxes marked as cleaning supplies but filled with nothing but dust and lies, and there they were, 2 small figures, blinking into the flood of light now pouring into their hiding place. 1 boy, 1 girl, neither older than 7, and they didn't cry or scream. They just stared. Because children used to captivity learn quickly how to freeze in place when the world changes too fast. And Logan dropped to a crouch instantly, pulling a bottle of water from his pack, voice low and calm as ever. You're okay now, we're not here to hurt you. And the girl moved first, just 1 step forward. And Shadow, trained beyond any handler's wildest expectations, simply sat down, tail sweeping the dust once. And the boy watching that gesture let out the faintest breath and whispered, "Dog," and Logan nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's Shadow, he's with me." And in that moment something inside Logan fractured again. Not out of grief, but out of rage. Because Kane hadn't even blinked when they'd found the kids, hadn't struggled, hadn't cursed, hadn't tried to hide it, just stood in the center of the warehouse like he was waiting to be replaced by the next monster on the payroll. And back at the processing line, as Kane was loaded into a van, Logan stood watching him, every muscle in his jaw locked tight. And when the van door slammed shut, Shadow barked once, short and loud, and Kane jumped just slightly, flinching for the first time, and it felt like a win, not justice. Not yet, but a strike. A break in the armor of a system that had counted on silence. And that night, back at the precinct, Logan didn't talk much, didn't decompress the way agents sometimes do after a win. He just sat in the quiet of his office, staring at a photo now tacked to his board. Lily and Ethan, sitting with social workers, clutching the stuffed animals they'd been given. Faces still wary but whole, breathing, healing, and beside him, Shadow sat quietly, eyes closed, body relaxed for the first time in 2 days, and Logan whispered, "We found more." And Shadow lifted his head just enough to nudge Logan's elbow with his nose before curling back down again. And Logan leaned back in his chair, heart still racing, pulse never quite returning to normal, because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But tonight, one more link in the chain had broken, and if they kept going, if they trusted their instincts, and the dog who always seemed to know before anyone else, they just might burn the whole operation to the ground. Logan sat on his porch that night, boots still dusted with warehouse grime, tactical vest unzipped, and slouched beside his chair like a discarded exoskeleton, the stale scent of adrenaline still clinging to his skin even after the shower. And next to him, Shadow lay with his chin on Logan's boot, ears flicking lazily every few seconds, but not asleep, never truly asleep, always watching, always tuned to frequencies no human could hear. And as the porch light flickered overhead and the crickets filled the Georgia dark with their gentle percussion, Logan let his thoughts spool out slowly, one breath at a time. Because for the first time in days the world wasn't hurtling forward, and yet his pulse hadn't slowed, not really. Because behind every second of calm was the memory of what they'd walked into, what they'd ripped apart, and what still loomed ahead. And he thought about the warehouse, the way Kane had stood there like a clerk at a shipping depot, clipboard in hand, human lives boxed up in back rooms, moved like shipments, forgotten like excess inventory, and Logan's jaw tightened just thinking about it. The way Kane hadn't screamed or run or begged, just smiled like a man who'd already built an exit strategy into his own downfall. Like someone who knew the names of people who would never let him stay in a cell longer than necessary. And Logan had seen that look before. Not in Kane, but in photos, pictures of children missing for months who had last been seen at train stations, bus stops, foster agencies, and he knew in his gut this wasn't over, that the Atlanta bust was just one gear in a much larger engine of horror. And as Shadow let out a soft huff and nudged Logan's hand with his nose, Logan glanced down and murmured, "You knew before I did, huh?" And the dog blinked once, calm and satisfied, like it hadn't been a risk at all. Just a job done right. And Logan thought back to the briefing earlier that day after the raid, after the bodies were counted and the warehouse secured, when Agent Ramirez pulled him aside with a file thick enough to choke a shredder and said, "We've got more, way more," her voice low and deliberate. This wasn't a hub, it was a spoke. And Logan flipped through the documents slowly. Photos of other kids, other aliases, other suspects flagged in Miami, in Charlotte, in Newark, in places that looked clean on the outside, but were full of shadow behind the curtain. And he saw now what they were dealing with wasn't just a ring, wasn't even a cartel, it was a network, hydra-headed and smart, using children like currency and airports like handoffs. And the more he read, the more he felt the steel lock into his spine, because this was what he was made for. This was why he carried the badge, not for tickets or red tape, but for the impossible moments. For the ones no one else saw coming until Shadow barked and the mask fell away, and Logan thought about Lily and Ethan again, not in fear now, but in the small smiles they gave when they were handed juice boxes and child services, how they finally spoke after 3 hours of silence. Lily saying she wanted to go home but didn't know where that was, and Ethan whispering that he dreamed of a yard with a dog in it, and Logan had to step out of the room when he heard that, just to breathe, just to feel the rage settle without letting it own him. And now, out here in the quiet, with Shadow beside him and no sirens in his ears, he whispered, "They're safe because of you." And Shadow thumped his tail once, soft against the porch planks like he knew that already, and then Logan's phone buzzed on the railing, and he reached for it without looking, thumb sliding over the screen to open the latest message from the federal task force, and the words hit like a heartbeat skipping. "Good work today. New intel coming in. High probability lead in Miami, possible extraction site." And Logan didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't even blink, just leaned forward, pressed his forearms against his knees, and stared into the night like he could already see the next battleground forming on the horizon. Because that's what this was now, not just cleanup, not just case files, it was war. And if there were still kids in cages, if there were still names on lists waiting to be processed, if there were still men like Kane smiling through glass and contracts, then Logan wasn't done, and neither was the dog lying silently beside him, and he stood slowly, grabbing the leash draped over the porch rail, clipping it with one hand. And Shadow stood too, alert instantly, body still relaxed but eyes now burning with readiness. And Logan looked down at him, voice steady and certain. "Come on, partner, let's go to work." And they walked into the night together. Two silhouettes in motion, no lights, no fanfare, just purpose carved in muscle and instinct. And somewhere far ahead, another set of eyes watched. Another child waited. And Logan knew this time they'd get there first, because this story wasn't about heroes or glory. It was about never missing the bark that could change everything. And that's exactly what they'd built themselves to hear.